Just in the interest of time, I want to make sure Ariel has enough time for her presentation. So
a lot of these do all still all go together.
So let me turn it over to Ariel. Thank you very much, Nick. Turn it over to Ariel.
Quick question is, are we recording?
Yes, and you don't want to.
No, so I would love to record and possibly write something up later, but my plan is for things to be, like, I will redact stuff. So whoops, I skipped a slide, but here's agenda. Hi, I'm Ariel. We're gonna be talking about the economy, so moving away from like this beautiful ideal state to the shitstorm that we're in. I'm thinking, for those of you that have seen this talk before, and there are a few of you, it's gonna be different this time because it's gonna be more of a discussion. I wanna start with knowns, then we'll talk about some unknowns and or topics for discussion. So as I mentioned, I would love to have some sort of output from this. And to that end, if you can state your name when you speak, that'll just help me keep track in the recording of like who said what, but I promise I will redact things later so it'll be, you know, as a senior security engineer from a large tech company said, you know, something to that effect. I do also take citations, you know, and sourcing very seriously as a writer, so find me later if you do want to be credited and I'll figure out some way of making that work. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the economy. The goals here... yes.
Just to give you a perspective on what Ariel is going to do, I want to make sure people understand there's some interesting things that we've had in the past from this event, which is like one of the topics that someone came up with was like near misses in cybersecurity. How do we think about near misses? Well, that became the basis for this paper on near misses, which became the basis for for this whole strategy around the Cyber Safety Review Board that the White House stood up. So there's some really cool things that we've done as a part of ACoD. I'm not necessarily saying that into that, but when Ariel says, hey, you can contribute to these things, those are the kind of things that we've been able to contribute to. All right, back to you.
Awesome. So I'm going to be talking about the economy sort of at a macro scale and how tech and the economy and security all fit together. These are going to be high-level, broad-brush statements. Don't at me. And the goals are to sort of give you a different way of thinking about a different framework for thinking about some of what we tackle in our work. And I would love to come away with some more examples of, like, I've gotten partway through and I've gotten some examples of how I've applied this metaphor, but I would love more. And or we can just talk about stuff at the end. So we'll get there when we get there. Okay, so the economy. This is the S&P 500's tech index from 98 to January 22. Broadly, the tech sector is lucrative because of its potential for huge ROI, overvalued because everyone's trying to get in on that huge ROI and trying to convince everyone else that they are that big win, and mostly nobody actually understands what's involved, so I think Ross has hit on this, but it's really easy to bullshit people when nobody really understands the underlying technology. And it's highly volatile because it turns out there's a lot of bullshit. In addition, so yeah, we get some of this. You can just like insert this meme kind of throughout this whole talk, I feel like. In addition, the tech sector has been until recently, so those previous statements are just kind of broad, true statements about tech and how it's valued in general. More recently, where's my little mouse up here? The tech sector has been very driven by revenue over profit models. So like Amazon wasn't profitable for 9 years after its founding, and that was just fine. Some of that was because of the state of regulation or lack thereof in the face of disruption and innovation. A lot of that had to do with the state of politics at the time, so like Jeff Flake's constant efforts to essentially like castrate the FTC and AGPI's total willingness to roll with that. And the simple reality that regulation always chooses innovation. You can't make rules about things that don't exist yet. Or you can try, but then things don't exist. Whoops, sorry. A lot of this has also been enabled by a general, like, fake it till you make it attitude that serves both VCs and startup founders, right? Because if you're going for a quick exit, you just need to BS people enough to give you the money to sell to somebody else, and then you're out scot-free. I was looking at some interesting and depressing papers while I was pulling some of this together about the number of lawsuits and startups, and it's like skyrocketed because it's all BS. It's all fraud. There's so much fraud.
90% of ICOs.
Yeah, just like there's just so much. And as long as you have good corporate lawyers with those terms and conditions that the White House would love to try to undo, but good luck with that. We're not going to be able to change that for a while. So that's kind of how it's been. Now, because the economy is so uniquely weird, things are a little bit different. Highly volatile markets are traditionally referred to as risk-off markets, and that's defined by the Economist Dictionary as businesses are unwilling to invest in new production facilities and banks are unwilling to lend. Investors prefer the safety of government bonds to equities, except for when the government does things and then it throws off the worth of the value of those bonds. That's a little bit of a problem. You can just ask SVB Bank. So that is changing things, and investors don't really know what to do with that. We're also seeing a record-breaking number of Americans on strike at this time. And we're seeing capital strikes as tech companies are laying off people without actually having a financial reason to do so. So a lot of the big tech companies that are laying off engineers right now are still in the black, and they're doing it for reasons. What we do know is that their stock price goes up every time there's a layoff, so you can put 2 and 2 together. And get 4 or 5. Right now, so in a risk-off market, investors want to see financially responsible and resilient companies, CEOs, that means the CEOs want profitability, which is kind of new for a lot of tech companies right now, and also not great for a lot of tech companies, especially in the SaaS, IaaS, PaaS place where everybody is so intertwined, and all of a sudden if we're cutting costs, that means everyone's cutting into each other's margins. So that's challenging. And also everybody's lying to each other about AI. So that's just the state of things. And we all know that. That's one of the things that's so ridiculous, is that we all know that, but we're just rolling with it. Because we can. Because fraud were declared.
So what does it mean? Tell me more.
What does it mean that everyone's lying about AI?
Yes.
Well, it means that we know that Microsoft, the provider of OpenAI and all of that, ChatGPT and whatnot, isn't able to provide the compute power to many of the companies that are purchasing the enterprise version of OpenAI and now saying and advertising that they're putting AI in their products. And they aren't quite ready to release it yet because there are delays and lags because Microsoft can't provide the compute power. And we all know that.
Has any implementation been production ready before it's been put into production?
Ever.
MVP, and move on to the product.
Exactly, and this is part of it, right? Why would you go back and get it in beta? You never do, because if it was minimum viable, that means it's good enough and it's out the door. Why would you go back, right?
Because Gartner says so. I said because Gartner said so.
Just in time for a clock.
You guys planning this?
Welcome. You missed my fraud were declared. It's okay, I'll go back. So these are some slides that I added for this room as food for thought, and then we can decide where we want to go. So in addition, we also have the role of tech. We talked about sort of the economy and tech and the economy, but let's talk about tech in the economy, and how it is definitely, it changes the speed and spread of information or misinformation or disinformation, right? And also enables sort of a democratization of engagement in the markets, whether that's through the influencer economy or okay, no, I guess I changed that later. The influencer economy and like what it means to sell and what it means to shape perspectives. I mean, right, we had analysts, and analysts sort of were the small group of influencers, but now, if you pay a celebrity enough, like all of a sudden your Bitcoin or whatever crypto you have is like worth whatever anybody says it is, right? Like, what is stuff actually worth? That's one of our things that we can discuss. The SVB bank collapse is also really interesting because would it have happened if we weren't in a 24-hour news cycle and didn't have things like Reddit, right? If we didn't have after-hours trading, if we were back when the stock exchange actually closed at 5 or 6 or whenever it closes, like, would that run have happened? Maybe, maybe not. We can also argue that the role of day traders and stock bros fits into this too, in terms of like the democratization of access to engaging in the market, right? Like all of a sudden we have GameStop being worth stuff because they want to damn the man, but what that really does is just introduce more chaos, because while things may or may not have been, corrupt before, at least they were slightly predictable, now it's just like, well, nobody knows. So to that end, right, we've got trading apps, we have meme stocks, and we have crypto. On the, yay, things are more equal, question mark. We also have greater opportunity for obfuscation as well, with neural net-based investment and also fraud detection. The data economy versus privacy laws and how that's changing in different ways at different times. And I would actually also argue that crypto is on the obfuscation side, because nobody really knows how it works, especially the people that invest in it, unless they're the guys that like found it in the room in the basement of the valley. So now we've got the economy and security.
Actually, can you allow for a slide for a moment? So, I'm going to post this. I'm thinking of this as also like an information asymmetry issue.
Exactly.
And perhaps the elimination of, or the eroding of information asymmetry.
But, I mean, I think that it's kind of the argument for on the democratization side.
Yes.
But the problem is there's no quality control, right? So like I was a freelance writer, and like I was able to build my rep and my brand when Twitter was still good. Do you remember those days? Like, who thought we'd ever say that? I know. I'm so glad that I only had to fight the level of like media that I fought at the time, because that news cycle I was still able to get a couple of hours guys. Now it's even shorter.
Yeah, so okay, let me see if let me repack what you just said. So before we had an information asymmetry issue, which thanks to technology and democratization of all these things, we now have eroded information asymmetry. So now, to gain an advantage again, we have to introduce disinformation to gain advantage again.
Right, I mean, the erosion of the asymmetry, I don't even know that it needs to be introduced, because it just is there inherently. I guess it's with fewer producers of information, you had fewer options, right? But now we have so many more options, and people are so easily funneled, right, into those to the confirmation biases and sources that they want versus like things they don't. It is still, I would still argue that it's still as hard, if not harder, to find quality information and to have access to quality. But it's easier to make it up.
So before it was easier to propagandize, right?
So I've been looking at a bunch of different data sources on this, and I still really like Rand came out with a report in 2017 on truth decay. It's like truth, like what is true, not tooth. And what they found was that in the United States, they sort of analyzed over the last like 200 years different periods of high mistrust in different institutions, whether that was the government or the media or like society. And they found several different factors over like 4 or 5 different periods of high levels of mistrust. But what they found was that the present was unique in that whereas the previous periods of high mistrust had maybe 1 or 2 factors, the present had all of them. And so I think what we're looking at, and this is also like similar arguments with the idea of a polycrisis, which I get to in another slide or two, but like the idea that, you know, bad things are always happening, right? A friend of mine from the Army recently told me about strategic deficit disorder. And it was the first time I heard that. I was like, my soul is crying. Right, there's always something going on. But right now there's a lot of somethings going on, and we all know about a lot of them. And so what does that mean for markets and the economy and how we invest and who has money and where does it go?
So in terms of, I guess, democratization of information, or I guess, getting things out. So in the 80s, you know, in news, it was ABC, NBC, CBS, and I don't remember whatever. And now you can put anything out on the internet, but with disinformation, misinformation, are we back to where, okay, anybody could be a newsmaker, but you have to have the reputation of, like, if you're an independent writer, then you have to build your brand, build your reputation, and so then you now have that, the bar raises again so that there's fewer information. So
it depends on how easily manipulated your audience is. And let me tell you, it's generally really easy. People are really easy to manipulate.
Yeah.
I mean, in my view, I think we cannot have it both ways. Like on one hand, there was a time when production of information costed some money. And it still does. So if you want somebody, like if you want a professional who has spent years and years researching a specific problem, to dedicate their time, somebody needs to compensate their time, right? So if nobody does it, if people are not unwilling to pay for information, which they are, so today, like how many people in the room subscribe to the specific news channels? Like many people get news for free because they want to get news for free. And so if information is free, then the money has to be somewhere. So somebody is a product. Like if you're not paying for the product, then you are a product. Anyway.
So there's a massive dissonance in between media that's free and media that you have to pay for. And this is going to be a subjective judgment, but there's a massive qualitative difference in between the media that's free and the media that you have to pay for. That's one of the problems with what looks more like a distributed information asymmetry than a concentrated one that we had before. But I still don't think the asymmetry itself is eroding. I think the model is changing, but we end up in a much more distributed way. I think the asymmetry itself is utilized to sorry.
Well, I think I agree with you in that the level of asymmetry may not necessarily be different, but I think because of the what we're seeing in terms of like wealth distribution and who has access to shift and who can pull the levers, right? And then because of the data economy and the way that the systems that we've built, I mean, like Pete Singer wrote a book on this, right? Lifecore, which is just like we've built systems that make it even easier to manipulate people that are already really easily manipulated. And our adversaries are using that because of course they would. And that's, you know, everything from like news to pop culture to, you know, investment, you know, to business, right, and fraud. I think to some of what you're saying too, it's also a matter of like how much work an individual or an entity or a government or a company, right, is going to put into verifying the information that they receive, right? Like the whole JP Morgan buying that company, Charlie? Was Charlie? No, Frank. Charlie was the founder, and yeah, Frank was the company that was that purported to make FAFSA easier, and the founder had never even filled out FAFSA.
Well,
And-
they just made up.
Yeah, she worked with a data scientist to make up
2 million
customers.
Yes.
Yeah, and they,
JP Morgan.
and it went through JP Morgan Chase's entire, due diligence process, right? So, it's that easy or that hard to verify and validate information. And when there's so much money involved and the potential for so much money involved, see several slides back of fraud were declared, right? Are businesses really going to take the chance on missing that potential unicorn? Or are they just going to buy it and hope it works out, or hope that if it doesn't look like it's going to work out, they can sell it off later?
And I think the thing that I keep coming back to, Sunil, is your pyramid from this morning. Right? We talk about misinformation, but we're not talking about misknowledge or miswisdom. Right? Where
Malinformation.
Yeah, those newsletters that you pay for, the ones that I do pay for, I get knowledge from them. Right? I don't need to read the Pragmatic Engineer newsletter to figure out who fired who. Right? You can find that in places, but I go there for that analysis. Right? So the wisdom is what is the valuable thing, not necessarily the access and the information.
Yeah. So this, I want to challenge that, right? So you paid for information,
You paid for information, you read something, it seems really cool. It seems like I'm in a room of really smart people, so congratulations, Shaw. But do you back test that newsletter or that wisdom and validate that in fact, after the fact, that was valuable and that therefore I have some metric or some measure of the value of that wisdom? No, I think I got smarter. There seems to be a lot of anecdotal evidence that I got smarter, but no, I'm not really back testing that. Right now, at the indicators of compromise level, I am, right? I can go back and I can say, it's phishing is down 17% or whatever, right? I ingested a bunch of crap. I applied some additional data to it, and phishing is down 17%. So that was a win. But I don't know that. Have we generated any wisdom about whether or not crypto is good? I don't think so.
Let's pause on that. I actually want to come back to that because I think I would love to know if the answer to that changes by the end of this talk. So if you don't mind, I'm going to keep going because I think that's part of what I'm trying to drive towards. And I'm partway there, and yeah, we'll see. Okay, so we've also got how the economy affects security and our work as defenders, right? So desperate times, desperate measures. When the economy is bad, crime goes up. I don't have a ton of data to support this yet because it's still new-ish, but also we probably see an increase of bug bounties, right? Whether they're quality or not doesn't really matter. People are going to try because they need money. With the tech sector layoffs, we all know that layoffs create resentment and also increase the anxiety in terms of job security. Uncertain economies also increase insider threat. I'm still waiting on the data to know if we are seeing a lot of these now formerly insiders with lots of knowledge and special skills, Mason style, attack their former employers. We'll see. And then also recognizing that security, typically, unless you are a security company, is a cost center. And even if you are on the security team for the security company, it's still a cost center. So as employers are looking to cut costs, how do we keep those costs from coming for us? And that was kind of the framing of the talks, of how I've given this talk before. We also are facing talent loss, right? So as those cuts do come for our teams, whether it's in tooling or in individuals, we're losing hands on keyboards and eyes on screens, and also the institutional knowledge that those people may have had. And that's something that, especially in fields like ours, where things move so quickly and people are terrible at documenting, I say as a technical writer that documents for security teams, we lose a lot of knowledge just when people move. And also, we're in the middle of 2 major wars with at least 3.5, if not 4, like highly capable cyber actors. So that's fun. Does anybody remember the supposed 0 day from like last week or 2 weeks ago from Signal? Yes, we were all like, I'm waiting for, yeah, that's gonna be a black hat talk. You know, and all the AI and all the ways that that's going really great, or not. So these are all like aspects of the economy and the world that affect our work as defenders and as security practitioners. And now, we come to the fork in the road. Can you raise your hand if you know the reference on this slide? Just thanks, Zach. This is from the original Muppets movie. Yeah, okay, if you see a fork in the road, take it, Yogi Bear quote, but this was the, okay. You know what, that's fine. So now I sort of present it to you. We can go in 2 directions. I have some slides that I prepared on some answers or some ways that I've proposed addressing some of the issues that I laid out in the previous slides. Talking about how the good news is that the ways that companies manage financial risk are actually very similar to the ways that we manage security risk, and how we can use language to pull those things together and align them. Or we can just toss the mic around and continue talking about some of the things that have come up in previous talks. A couple things that I think are relevant that like tied to some of these is talking about like InfoSec and fraud detection and whether or not we can like align ourselves more closely with like the IRS and other financial fraud crimes people because of like what insider threat really amounts to. At some point we should talk about sanctions, because countries that are highly sanctioned are also countries that resort to cybercrime to get the money that they can't get through trade. So whether the role of sanctions in cybercrime is, I think, a conversation that needs to be had with a room full of smart people, so maybe this is that room. We can also talk about strategic value and defining worth, right? So this actually, I added this in the last, like, right before I started talking, but like, how do we define what something is worth? And like the idea of strategic value is that something is worth, something is only of strategic value if it's something you have that somebody else doesn't, right? So whether that's an indicator of compromise or information with the whole like, the ISACAs and like people's willingness to share or not, or whether it's defined as like how much is something worth, well, how much money are you willing to put into defending it, right? Like these are kind of some theoretical or philosophical approaches that we can talk about as a group. So, raise your hand, I guess, if you want to hear some of what I'm proposing, or, yeah, we can start with that. So, yeah? Okay. Okay, I'll go quick. All right. It's basically like the ways that companies, like, we all know how to balance budgets, right? Like, we cut costs, we increase the efficiency, we increase, like, how we use the stuff we have. And we decrease dependency. Remember when eggs were like $10? Did you go to the one grocery store to buy eggs and just be like, well, I guess they're $15 now, I'm not gonna look anywhere else for cheaper eggs? Like, no, of course you didn't, unless you have tons of money to spend on eggs, which, good for you. You shop around, right? If we decrease dependency on a single vendor, say cloud provider, then you reduce your dependency on them when they jack up the prices or when they fail, right? So having multiple providers for a single service is one way that we can ensure resiliency. Now, that does sound like increasing costs. Well, you can balance that by cutting costs for all the tools that you don't use and the tool sprawl and all of that, which reduces your attack surface, right? So this is like down economies or risk-off economies are a great time for security professionals to go find our allies in finance and say, hey, we have the same goals. Let's cut costs, but do it smartly so that we can also reduce the attack surface, reduce the risks coming into our company, increase our resilience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
To what degree is the challenge that you're struggling to quantify the security risk?
Do you mean like, how do we, so can you say that again?
Yes, so how do we quantify the security risk in a way to make it easy to have a conversation with the business about it?
I think So I think that's something that we've been trying to do for a long time, and it's not really working because people are willing to take the risk because we just hope it happens to the other guy, right? Also, speaking from experience, I know that if our customers don't care, our business doesn't care.
I was about to say, I think the.
And is that the right way, or is it not?
Well, it's the reality. So this talk is much more about like, okay, like we're in the world we're in, right? So how do we deal with that? Did you want to?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think, so I've actually been working on building out a risk
Say your name.
Oh, sorry, Amanda, ACoD. I think the main way that you can actually get the business's attention around security risk is actually quantifying it to a dollar amount.
Right.
But you can't do that without having a common taxonomy within the organization. So whether a cybersecurity risk comes down to actually being a strategic risk or an IT risk or a talent risk, it's kind of got to go through a very wide funnel and then get filtered down. And then you can actually have that conversation about a dollar amount. Because if you can't put it into dollars, the business doesn't care. But you have to be able to put it in a defendable position. So
I think that could not have created a better segue into how, like, let's talk about taxonomy, let's talk about language. So, Ward Cunningham, who's the guy that originally coined the term for technical debt, coined it after reading a book that I wrote a paper on in college called, I studied linguistics, so like I think about words a lot. And it's called Metaphors We Live by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. It's super esoteric, but I 10 out of 10 recommend. Which basically posits, right, that metaphors are part of how we exist in the world, right? Like we as humans. And so that led him to thinking about ways to explain refactoring and the need to refactor to the business, right? And so he explained it in terms of technical debt, that at the end of the day, if you don't go back and it's okay to take out loans. It's okay to, like, you know, go apply like agile software development in the true sense, not in the what businesses have turned it into sense. But at some point, you have to go back and refactor, because if you don't, pretty soon you're paying all interest, right? So we can apply, like, what other, this is kind of where I solicit input and from you all about like what other ways, what other business terms can we use for security, like for security metaphors. I would also say to go back though to like how we quantify the risk. I don't think that right now that this economy is the time to approach, is the environment to be talking about like quantifying security risk. Like what we should be looking at is how to influence our partners in finance who are already looking to cut costs and to do some of those actions and help them pick the ones that will be best for us, right? So whether it's, you know, like if finance is looking to cut $500,000 from your tool spread, like, hey, security, like now's a great time to go tell them which tools to cut that are the ones putting your organization most at risk. Not like how much risk, doesn't matter, they don't care, you know, and you can say, hey, I know you need to cut 500K, why don't you do it here, here, and here? Yeah, let's spread the mic around.
So, where that's a challenge, where that's sometimes a challenge, is that you suggest cutting here, here, and here, and then executives are like, well, why did we have that in the first place? Who made that decision? And that becomes something that I think people become fearful of recommending. And I'm curious to know if that's true, if anyone else experiences that they're reluctant to speak up because afraid to say, hey, let's cut here, here, here. It's so obvious that we aren't using this tool as shelfware. We're not using all the functionality to get better tools. Let's cut it. But if we raise it, it will actually present bigger questions from leadership about who made that decision in the first place.
That's a pathological organization.
So, you don't experience it though? You don't observe that?
I would say if you gotta decide that you got two tools, CRM or whatever, and you cut one, you're cutting those employees that use them.
You're expert.
So yeah, if you got multiple tools and you're paring down to one, then you got little fiefdoms, and that team that was working on that one that's getting cut is now potentially losing their job or have to learn another job which they might not like.
Yeah, but maybe they got laid off already.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm, so like, I haven't experienced that, and I will, like, I don't want to assume, but my career has not been super long in this world. I started in and around government and national security, and I'm kind of in the private sector for the first time and seeing all of this play out against this hellscape that it is. And so, like, I know that a bunch of the people that I worked with who wanted to, like, our organization has had so much change in the personnel that maybe that is something that others have experienced, but for us, it's like, who got that tool? I don't know. Like, why do we even have it? I don't know. Is anybody using it? Let's find out after we get rid of it.
I guess I'm going to agree with this guy's point earlier that I feel
Can you say your name?
I am Mason Cleveland, and I guess the point I'll put in there is that when we cut tools at the same time, we're also potentially introducing risk. And that, you know, I feel very, let's call it still a Star Wars quote, like the tighter you grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. So by cutting their tools, if teams had specific needs, now I'm encouraging them to go get shadow IT or work outside the company structure. And so, you know, that becomes a very dangerous equation to kind of arbitrarily go in there and say, well, we're security, we know best.
That's why you blame finance. I mean, I'm serious. Like, that's why you suggest to finance that drives the cutting decision.
Well, then finance is putting them, it's just basically acting as de facto. I'm still putting the risk on
Yeah.
them, right? 'Cause I'm still saying, okay, you can't share externally or you can't use the tool you're using, so now they go set up a Dropbox.
Absolutely. The risk issue is still a problem, and hopefully you have really good controls in place, walls. But at least that way you make people hate you less, and they can hate finance.
So the point that I want to make as a practitioner, something that, you know, we navigated this many times, is us as security practitioners, as we go to the business, do we have a way where we know what are the crown jewels to the business? Have we done that assessment before we make a decision about, you know, cutting things, cutting people, cutting X, you know, or putting controls in place, controls that start decaying? So, you know, to your point, I really like your point about, you know, collaborating with the business, collaborating with the finance, collaborating with, you know, what really drives the business. Step number one would be to really understand your crown jewels. Number two is, once you have your crown jewels, are they really crown jewels? Can you actually, you know, count them on your fingers? They should be handful. You cannot have crown jewels, you know, everywhere. And then knowing the controls around it, which goes back to the earlier point about having a common taxonomy of, of understanding the risks. So that's probably a starting point where security and business can be talking on common terms.
I guess I'm going to ask you a question. A lot of companies, in my experience,
What's your name? Okay, yeah, Mike. It's for the recording later. I'm not going to.
That's fine. Just to add context, one thing I would add is that a lot of companies, even if they have smart people involved, don't necessarily even know what the crown jewels are. And I'll just give you a case in point example here. Every publicly traded company has the ability to make stock. We know that they can go and sign a board. People are getting RSUs. What process protects that? Can anyone in this room tell me what that stock making process looks like?
That goes back to my slide about fraud were declared.
If you can't, you've already missed a really essential thing, is if someone goes to the stock market, makes 50% extra stock and trades it, they can't reverse that decision. There is no swift bank, get my money back. Those stocks are out there, I've now killed the company.
Yeah, sorry, I got to jump on that one. I had a different comment about it, but
what's your name?
I'm sorry, Jerry Perullo. I would argue, work for Stock Exchange, funny enough. But I mean, I would argue, who cares? It hasn't happened yet. When it will, it's worth everybody spinning up. But otherwise, we're selling a problem. We're trying to convince everybody that they need to be worried about that versus using the intel. And I know nobody wants to be first. Yeah, but I'm using it to illustrate that we do need to orient towards things that are actually coming in by intelligence, and that's where we invest. But on the theme of being an a-hole and contrarian to everybody in the
Do
room.
it.
I think on the quantification side, we're all wrong. I mean, if you have a hypothetical organization that's investing $10 million a year in security budget, and you're the security leader, anyone on the team, and you think they should be spending $75 million, the problem isn't that the board and the business thinks that's too expensive. The problem is that even if they give you $75 million, you're not going to move the needle on security. When you 10x your security investment, it's not helping. It's not a money problem. We're still in the adolescent heroics phase, and that's what wins, and that's the only thing that wins,
Well,
not money.
I would also say that a big part of that, and this kind of goes back to what Ross was talking about. I have built part of my whole shtick with security is that it's a human problem. It's not a tech problem. If it was a tech problem, we would have solved it by now. I believe in you all, but it's actually about people. And that goes to what you were saying about if we just cut tools arbitrarily, that's going to drive people to create workarounds. So none of it is easy, and you do need to think about the context of your own, of your organization, of your operating environment, and definitely work with knowing, you need to know what's of value and what things are worth in context, right? But I think that's a big part of it, because nobody wants to do the work of changing people. That's hard.
I wanted to offer a metaphor. So one metaphor that I use often is that of a sports team. And for those who know me, I have this 5x5 matrix bingo card called the cyber defense matrix. And one of the narratives, so 25 squares, and one of the narratives I'll say is, well, think of it like a sports team. I only have 11 players. I can't add a 12. So which 11 boxes am I going to cover? Okay? And by the way, if the offense moves, I need to move something away from an existing box to another box, which means I'm leaving one of these boxes exposed. Now, the other team may score a touchdown as a result of that. And of course, in the sports metaphor, if you make that decision and you look at the consequences of that, but we all recognize that's a decision you have to make these kind of trade-offs because you can't always add a 12th player.
We know that, but the recruiters don't.
And you may actually, from a finance standpoint, you may actually get penalized and you may lose a player, right? So you may end up being down to 10. Again, you have to figure out what boxes you can cover with that 10.
I have a question. How many people in the room have canceled their Uber accounts when Uber was hacked?
Oh, when they were hacked?
Yes. Is there anybody in the room?
That's not why I canceled them.
Second that.
I didn't set it up because they were at the Second Amendment.
I have a counter question. Can anybody name any company that was actually negatively impacted in the market?
That's a better question.
Last pass.
Opta's down 12%.
So the question, just to repeat the question and put it more broadly, is what are the actual real consequences of a breach, right? And how do we deal with that? Right? So we've got, yes, Okta is hurting, LastPass is definitely hurting. Yeah, but LastPass is a freaking security company. Of course they're hurting. But Home Depot is doing just fine.
Equifax?
Equifax is also doing okay.
I don't think so.
They're pretty protected, aren't they?
It's a short term. I still have to deal with it. Equifax is just fucking
Yeah, SolarWinds is still here. A lot of it is it's a short-term hit, which is interesting. Because their investors will be willing to risk short-term hits that haven't happened yet for long-term gains, but not.
But why are we fighting it? Well, instead of saying they're all wrong, why are we saying maybe we're wrong? 54% of CEOs out of 1,000 surveyed just said, I think it was PwC, Accenture, that the cost of cyber defense outweigh the risk. And instead of crapping on that, being upset, we need to say, oh shit, they're right.
Right. So that goes back to the question of what is stuff really worth. And I think I'm being called for time. I did want to just shout out to the sources and people that have helped contribute to this. And also, if we're not, are we at time scale?
We are.
Oh, okay. So apparently we're at time, and maybe it's lunch now. I need to move my car, but come find me. I'm around.
Yeah.
And I would love more conversation on this.
Yeah. So food's available. By all means, bring it back here and continue our conversation.
I'll give some of my keys if they move my car.
I already have some of the car, so yeah, I'm happy to move for you. Or somebody, anyway. But yeah, food's you might want to move yourself. Food's available.